Anxiety, it creeps in quietly. At night, when everything should be calm. In the middle of a conversation without warning. Spitty in the silence between your own thoughts. But what if we've misunderstood it entirely? What if anxiety isn't a malfunction, but a message? For decades, we've been told anxiety is a medical disorder, a flaw in our chemistry, a problem to be fixed. But what if that's only part of the truth? What if anxiety isn't a sign that something is wrong with you but something is wrong with the world around you? This isn't a disease. This is a signal. A quiet alarm inside the human soul, because the more awake you become, the more anxious you feel. The more you notice the contradictions, the empty conversations, the artificial happiness, the constant performance of normal life. Anxiety might not be a defect. It might be a form of perception, painful, unwanted, but accurate response to a society that thrives on illusions. Alan Watts once said, "You are not anxious, you are awake." And maybe that's the truth we've been running from. Maybe we aren't broken, we're just starting to see clearly. And seeing clearly in a blind world hurts. The system we live in depends on sedational, numbing discomfort, avoiding silence, chasing distraction. But if you stop running, if you sit with it, if you really listen to what your anxiety is trying to say, you may find that beneath the fear, there's something else. A truth, a confrontation with who you are, and what this world has become. So what if anxiety isn't the enemy? What if it's the first step in waking up? This is not a self-help video. This is not a clinical diagnosis. This is a psychological autopsy of the modern mind, a journey into what it means to live in a world that's lost its grip on meaning, and how one philosopher, Alan Watts, offered a terrifying, liberating answer. You're not anxious. You're awake. And that's exactly the problem. We live in a culture that pathologizes discomfort. If you're sad for too long, you're depressed. If you're restless, you have ADHD. If you're anxious or chemically imbalanced. But what if anxiety isn't a malfunction of the mind? What if it's a response to noise, to contradiction, to a life that feels hollow behind the smile? There's a quiet truth that most people never say out loud. Anxiety often begins when you start asking the right questions. Why am I doing this? Why do I feel disconnected from everything that's supposed to make me happy? Why does life feel like a performance I don't believe in? The more honest the question, the more uncomfortable the answer. We're taught to fear that discomfort, to medicate it, suppress it, or distract ourselves until it goes away. But in doing that, we miss what anxiety actually is. It's not always a disorder. Sometimes it's clarity, raw, terrifying clarity. Anxiety reveals the cracks in the system you were told to trust. It shows you the absurdity of chasing validation in a machine designed to exploit your insecurity. It exposes how much of your identity is borrowed, copied, constructed. And when those illusions begin to fall apart, it feels like panic. But maybe that panic isn't madness. Maybe it's awakening. Alan Watts understood this long before anxiety became a modern epidemic. He saw how modern life pushes us to live in our heads, constantly analyzing, predicting, controlling. And the more we try to control reality, the more anxious we become when we fail. Because the truth is, we were never meant to be this detached from nature, from emotion, from ourselves. Watts believed anxiety was what happens when consciousness turns inward but doesn't know what to do with what it finds. It begins to loop, to spiral, because it's seeing the truth. But no one has prepared it for the consequences of that vision. So instead of facing it, we label it. We call it dysfunction. We medicate it into silence. But deep down, you know. Your anxiety isn't just random. You feel it at work, in school, in traffic, in conversations that feel scripted, in moments where everything is supposed to feel fine and yet something inside you tightens like a warning. Anxiety is not always an illness. Sometimes it's a rebellion. A subconscious scream that your life is out of sync with your values, and if that's true, then the goal isn't to cure anxiety, it's to understand it, to ask why it's here, to ask what it sees that you don't. Because if anxiety is a signal, then we'd be fools to ignore it. Alan Watts wasn't a self-help guru. He didn't promise success, wealth, or peace of mind. He offered something more dangerous, a mirror that reflected not who you pretend to be, but who you actually are beneath the ego, beyond the mask. And what he saw, what he taught, unsettled people, because it meant facing a truth most spend their lives avoiding, that your suffering may not be a glitch. It may be a clue. Watts believed that anxiety is not caused by the chaos of the world, but by our resistance to it. Our refusal to accept the fluid, unpredictable nature of life. We are obsessed with control, with certainty, with protecting the fragile identity we've constructed. But the more tightly we grip reality, the more it slips through our fingers. And that gap, the space between how we want life to be and how it really is, that's where anxiety is born. Watts explained that our minds create an illusion of separateness. We see ourselves as isolated egos floating in an alien world. But this is a misunderstanding, a trick of language and logic. You are not a separate entity in the universe. You are the universe, expressing itself as you. That insight is liberating. But it's also terrifying, because it means giving up the illusion of control. It means surrendering the fantasy that you are the center of everything. And that surrender, that letting go, is what most people call anxiety. The ego fears its own death, and waking up feels like dying to truly live. Watts argued we must be willing to let go of the self, the persona, the story. But the mind doesn't go quietly. It fights, it panics, it invents problems, distractions, obsessions. It does anything to avoid that silent drop into the unknown. Watts described anxiety as the desire to escape from desire. A recursive loop. You're anxious, and then you become anxious about being anxious. But what if you did something radical? What if you stopped running? What if, instead of resisting the discomfort, you sat with it? Watts believed that true peace comes not from avoiding discomfort, but from going straight into the heart of it. Not to conquer it, not to fix it, but to understand it. To dissolve the illusion that you are ever separate from it. This is conscious discomfort, not a mistake, but a portal, a passage between two worlds, the world of ego and fear, and the world of presence and surrender. Watts didn't just speak philosophy, he embodied paradox. He laughed at seriousness. He found stillness in chaos because he understood that anxiety isn't just emotional, it's philosophical. It arises when the map no longer matches the territory. When our constructed worldview collides with the wild truth of existence. And if you feel that tension, if you're starting to see through the cracks, it might mean you're not losing your mind. You might be losing your illusions. Anxiety isn't proof that you're broken. It might be proof that you're beginning to wake up. And if that's true, then maybe anxiety isn't your enemy. Maybe it's your guide. Fear has always been powerful. But fear, when organized, becomes a tool. And anxiety in that context is no longer just personal. It's political. Throughout history, fear has been used not just to survive, but to control. Governments, religions, corporations, all learned the same lesson. A fearful population is an obedient one. In the Cold War, it was nuclear annihilation. In the post-9/11 era, it was terrorism. Today, it's uncertainty itself. Economic collapse, viral outbreaks, social instability. The fear never ends. It just evolves. Because when people are afraid, they don't ask questions. They don't challenge the system. They cling to authority. They beg for safety even if it means surrendering freedom. Fear turns citizens into consumers, into dependents, into passive participants in a story they didn't write. And what does that do to the human mind? It creates a permanent low-grade anxiety-like static in the background of your thoughts. You can't name it. You can't point to where it's coming from, but it's there. A constant sense that something's wrong, and it might be you, but it's not you. It's the environment you've been placed in. Alan Watts warned us about this long before it became obvious. He saw how society manufactures identity, how institutions feed off uncertainty only to sell you the illusion of certainty in return. Education, systems that reward conformity, media channels that frame fear as entertainment, a culture that tells you who to be, then shames you for not being authentic. And we call this normal. But what if the system isn't broken? What if it was built this way on purpose, to keep you distracted, to keep you anxious, to keep you reaching for solutions outside yourself? Because an anxious mind is a profitable mind. It buys, it obeys. It doesn't rebel. And here's the most disturbing part. The more sensitive, thoughtful, and awake you are, the more susceptible you become, not because you're weak, but because you see more. You pick up on the contradictions, you feel the incoherence, and your body reacts. Your nervous system screams, "This isn't right." But no one around you says it. Everyone pretends this is fine. So you begin to question your sanity instead of the system. This is how fear is weaponized, not just through war or violence, but through silence, through isolation, through a million small signals that say, keep your head down, don't question, stay in line. And anxiety becomes the natural response to a world that punishes awareness. So maybe you're not weak. Maybe you're not unstable. Maybe you've simply noticed something the world doesn't want to admit, that the structures meant to keep us safe might be the ones making us sick. Watts once said, we seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent. And if that's true, then how much of your fear was planted there? How much of your anxiety belongs to you? And how much was engineered? You weren't born anxious. You were taught to be. From the moment you entered the system, you were conditioned slowly, methodically into a permanent state of mild panic. At first, it was grades, then approval, then status, then money. But underneath it all was the same message. You are not enough, not yet. And so you became addicted to becoming better, becoming worthy, becoming someone who finally deserves rest. But that moment never comes. The treadmill just speeds up, and you run faster, until the running becomes your identity. And stopping, that feels like death. This is not an accident. It's design. The system doesn't want you at peace, because a peaceful person doesn't consume. A peaceful person doesn't obey without question. A peaceful person starts asking, why am I doing any of this? So instead, you're trained to measure your value in numbers, test scores, social media likes, performance metrics, constant ranking, constant surveillance. Even leisure becomes competitive. Even rest becomes something to earn. This is how panic is normalized. And when your nervous system begins to crack under the weight, what happens? You're told you are the problem. You're offered coping tools, breathing apps, motivational quotes, productivity hacks, anything except the truth, which is this. You are not meant to live like this. Human beings are not machines. You are not a task to optimize. You are not a brand to promote. Alan Watts saw it long before the algorithms took over. He saw how we confuse existence with utility, How we confuse aliveness with achievement. He once said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." Yet that's exactly what modern life demands. Constant self-analysis, constant self-presentation, constant fear that you are falling behind in a race no one understands, so you panic. You feel like you're drowning, but you keep smiling, because everyone else is pretending to. And deep down, there's a terrifying thought. What if this is the dream? What if you're chasing freedom inside a prison you were taught to decorate? Anxiety, in this context, is not irrational. It is the most logical response to an insane culture. You've been taught to fear your own intuition, to suppress your body's signals, to override your soul with strategy. But your panic is not a failure. It's intelligence. It's the whisper beneath the noise saying, "This isn't it. This isn't living." And if you truly listen, you'll realize something. Your anxiety has been trying to wake you up all along. You've tried to escape it. You've tried to outthink it, outwork it, outpray it, but it follows you. The anxiety, the restlessness, it's a sense that something's missing. And maybe that's because nothing is wrong with you. Maybe what's wrong is that you're still resisting the truth. Every spiritual awakening begins with disillusionment. It starts when the old story stops making sense, when the goals you were given feel empty, when the rules feel like lies. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the crack. The moment light starts to leak in, Alan Watts understood that transformation never begins with comfort. It begins with collapse. He spoke of the paradox. To truly wake up, you must let go of the need to be safe, to be certain, to be in control, because the mind cannot awaken by force. It must be broken open. This is the part no one talks about. That awakening is brutal. That truth feels like dying. Because it is. The death of the old self. The persona you spent years building. The goals you thought mattered. The fears you thought protected you. And the anxiety that haunted you. It wasn't here to destroy you. It was here to guide you to this edge. The edge of illusion. The edge of who you thought you were. And beyond that edge is silence, stillness, awareness without judgment. But to reach it, you have to pass through the fire. You have to feel everything. You have to stop numbing, stop running, stop pretending. Because on the other side of that pain is presence. The kind of presence Watts described as becoming one with the moment. Not escaping reality, but dissolving into it. No more separation between the thinker and the thought. No more chasing a better version of yourself. Just being, and that being, that return to what you've always been, is the beginning of peace. But it doesn't come wrapped in comfort. It comes dressed as anxiety, as confusion. Because you must unlearn the world to remember yourself. And when you finally stop fighting it, when you let go of the need to fix everything, inside you, you begin to see anxiety for what it really is. A doorway, a dark, narrow passage that leads out of the machine, out of the false self, out of the noise, into something ancient, something sacred, something that cannot be explained. Only lived, Watts called it the wisdom of insecurity, the freedom of falling with nowhere to land, the strange serenity that comes from accepting that you will never be in control because you never were. And maybe, just maybe, that's not something to fear. Maybe that's the beginning of actual freedom. The words of Alan Watts echo louder than ever. You're not anxious. You're awake. What does it mean to be awake? Not the shallow wakefulness of daily routine, caffeine, and screens, but the deep, unsettling awareness that pierces the veil of illusion. To be awake is to see the world without filters, to recognize the stories you were told and to realize they are just stories. It is to live with your eyes wide open, even when the truth is painful. even when the silence screams, even when your heart races and your breath catches, because awakening is not a refuge from anxiety. It is the anxiety itself transformed. It is the nervous system's way of telling you that you are alive, that you are present, that you are breaking free from the scripted nightmare of false security. This awakening does not mean you will never feel fear again, but fear loses its power when it is met with clarity. When you stop running from your own mind, when you lean into the discomfort and say, I see you, I hear you, I am here. And in that presence, anxiety begins to dissolve. Not because it vanishes, but because it no longer controls you. You become the witness to the storm, not the storm itself. This is the path Watts invites us to walk. The path where anxiety becomes a guide, a signal of awakening rather than sickness. It is a call to reclaim your own mind from a world built to fracture it, to reclaim your own life from the narratives that trap you. Because to be awake is to be free, free from illusion, free from control, free from the endless cycle of fear and escape. And yes, is terrifying. Because waking up means facing the void, the unknown, the death of the old self. But it is also the most human thing you can do, to live awake. To live away, to live fully even, if it means living with anxiety, is to live authentically. So the next time anxiety visits, don't fight it. Don't silence it. Don't run. Listen, you're not anxious. You're awake, and that is the beginning of everything.